All right, everybody, it's the Jere Metcalf podcast where top real estate agents tell how they do it. Today, we have Dennis Carvajal from Miami, a top real estate agent in his market. He's going to tell us all about how he has made such a great success of himself. Dennis, good to have you here today.
Hey, Jere, thank you. And let me start off by saying I love what you're doing here. I think this is such a great platform for all of us agents to tune in and learn from each other. I'm a big believer that it doesn't matter how big you are or how far you're trying to take your business, how long you've been in the business or how short. It's great to be able to tune in and learn from other people.
Awesome. Well, it's awesome to have you here, Dennis. So tell us a few things. I have some record sales I know that you've done and some really big sales you've done in Miami. We're talking about 15, 17 million, 12 million, and you've done several of those, not just one or two. But tell us how long you've been in the business and how you got in the business.
Yeah, so I've actually been in the business about 13 or 14 years. I got licensed. I'm 35 now, so I got licensed at about 19 or 20.
Wow.
And it's actually funny. I was actually working in the mailroom of one of the biggest law firms in Miami, and I had this aspiration of being an attorney, big, high-priced attorney, and thought that was like the coolest thing ever. And I failed to recognize that I was a terrible student. And school just wasn't, for me in that sense of, law school and all that. So I did that. I love to work, though. And I come from a real estate background. My family actually has always been in commercial real estate as far as owning and operating commercial real estate. So I had always kind of been exposed to it, but never really on the residential side. And I decided to get my license and got into it, did my first deal when I was like 2 weeks in. It was a little 12-unit apartment building that I sold, which was an amazing experience. It was, when things were crazy here in Miami. I mean, I was 2 weeks into having my license, and I had, I think, 6 offers on a building in the first.
So that was a good start. 2 weeks in. So you started kind of that's a residential building, but that's kind of a commercial deal.
Yeah, it was actually it belonged to an aunt and uncle of mine that gave me the opportunity, and it was just such an incredible experience because, I really got my first taste of negotiating and learning from them, at such a young age, trying to do that deal. Mm-hmm. And I think we had like 3 or 4 offers over the asking price. It was such a crazy experience for somebody so young just starting out.
Wow, that's great. So you kind of started with the family. You had exposure to, first you're going to be an attorney. You've got exposure to commercial, which is kind of in that world. And tell us what led you to residential.
It's a funny story. I actually, so I got my license, and in the beginning I did that deal, and I had hung my license with a really, 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 really small company, which was like a subsidiary of a mortgage lender. And I'll never forget my grandmother one day. I think it was a Wednesday Brokers Open. My grandmother was like 87 years old at the time, and she was on her way out, and she ran into a woman who she knew from, as funny as it sounds, from the salon. And this was an industry veteran. She had been in the business for, I want to say 40 or 45 years, had a boutique, luxury, small boutique firm, but was doing great. And my grandmother walked into her open house and said, "Oh my God, you have to meet my grandson. He just got his license. And, you've got to meet him."
I like your grandmother. Yeah.
No, she was incredible. And so I was home that day, and she came home and she said, "You have to go down the street to this house. This lady's there. I told her about you." So I walked into the house. It was a $2.5 million listing. And I walked in and I met her, and the lady basically said, "Come by the office next week and we'll talk, and you can put your license with us." So I went and I met with her, and it was an incredible opportunity because I didn't go work for anybody in particular. I did my own thing and everything, but mm-hmm. She gave me an incredible opportunity, which, she had 2 homes in the same gated community that were high-end homes. I was 19 or 20 years old. And she basically said, "I'm going to give you the keys to these houses, and you can open them whenever you want, every Saturday, Sunday, whatever you want." And that's how I kind of started, and that's really how I got my foot in the door and started kind of picking up clients off of those open houses.
That's incredible. That's incredible. That's a great story. So I guess you kind of you've got a taste for that, and the momentum took over, and that you ended up being a residential real estate agent.
Yeah, I mean, I went in there, and it was funny because I was such a young kid that people would look at me showing these houses, and the one thing that I told myself going in was, I got to make sure I can't look like a fool. So I've got to make sure that even though I'm brand new, haven't sold anything, haven't done a deal in here, I got to make sure that in this neighborhood where there were 136 homes, I got to know every single person that lives here, who they are, when the house sold, what they paid, so that when people come in, you can tell them on the neighborhood. And even though maybe they don't know, you look young and they don't know that you haven't done any deals in there at the time, but I knew that neighborhood better than anybody.
That's brilliant. Well, I think sometimes when they don't see you coming, for example, when you're young, the bar is set a little bit low. So when you're that competent and you know your stuff and you know your market, it's easy to impress. And once you do that and you've already got 2 listings, that's great. So now go ahead.
No. It's the funny thing about that story is, I had somebody when I got licensed around that time that said, you're crazy if you think people are going to give you $2 million listings and $2.5 million listings. And I looked at them and I thought, I mean, maybe because I'm so much, I'm so young for that market. But that next year, I went on to sell more than anybody in that neighborhood.
That's it. Well, you knew that neighborhood. You did your job. I think so many agents don't take the time to learn their market. They focus just on going after the business and convincing people to hire them, when the best way to do that is to what you just did, do a good job and know your market, and people will come to you.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, knowledge is power. And people, when you're dealing in that neighborhood or in that arena of price point and clientele, they want to know that who's representing them is knowledgeable and knows what's going on. And if you don't know and you're just kind of trying to wing it, people in that level can read that and they can tell.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So getting into the business, one of your biggest challenges obviously was, well, your strength was your weakness was being young, but do you have any other challenges that you overcame that you can share with us?
No, I mean, I got into the business and immediately wanted to get into the high-end market, which obviously was a difficult thing to get into because of my age. Mm-hmm. But, slowly but surely just really focused on that area. And, one of my cousins when I was growing up used to tell me something that kind of resonated, and I kind of carried into that, which she said, it's always, you never want to be a jack of all trades, but a master of none. And that kind of resonated with me. And I really told myself, you know what, I'm going to focus on this market. I'm going to focus on this area. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. Mm-hmm. So, I really honed in on that and really became a student of that. And like I said, who lives in the neighborhood, when they bought, what they paid, when that happened, and really kind of knowing that. And then even though, I really hadn't done anything there, putting out marketing pieces, informational pieces catered to that particular area. And at the end of the day, that's really what people want to see more than anything.
Exactly. They want to see the information. Well, it reminds me so much of something I did when I broke into the luxury market, which wasn't early on. Mine was only a few years ago, but I just specialized. I just picked a really expensive neighborhood and I learned it and knew it. You get a listing appointments and when you know the market like that, all the other stuff kind of goes away. And then when you're at a company like Sothebys, the marketing does take care of itself. But what gave you the wisdom at such a young age to do that? So many other people are the opposite. I go to networking meetings and they say, oh, I'm a real estate agent. If you know somebody that's thinking about buying or selling, just let me know. I'll work with them. And I find it interesting because the majority of people in our industry have that mindset, and you early on as a 19-year-old weren't. Was there anything that happened that made you see that differently so early on with so little? I mean, you didn't even have experience.
No, it's like anything. I mean, I just, I got into it and I thought, well, how am I going to, it's not just going to come from the sky. And I thought, how am I going to get people to pay attention to me, and how am I going to get the door to do some of these deals? And, that's when I came up with, obviously, you don't want to go into an open house and meet with people and feel like they're looking at you like you have no idea what you're talking about. That's the worst thing you can do, because they'll never call you again.
Yeah.
But no, I can't really say that it was anything in particular. It just kind of seemed to me like common sense that, I needed to figure something out to drum up some business, and that it wasn't just going to fall out of the sky, especially for a 19 or 20-year-old.
Exactly. So you knew you had to focus. What are you most proud of that you've done so far with your career as a real estate agent?
That's a good question.
I mean, it could be a big deal. It could be just that you really did something nice. It could be a challenge you overcame, anything.
Well, I think there's a couple things that I'm blessed to say that I could be proud of. I think breaking into that market at such a young age, for me was very humbling, and I was proud of. One of the biggest deals that I ever did was actually for a sports figure that I didn't represent them, but we brought the buyer, and I was like one of the biggest fans of this person. And to be able to do that deal at a young age, which was a big deal, was just and actually I'd never really felt starstruck before. But the day of the walkthrough, I met this guy, and I was like, wow, you know what I mean? Because it was somebody that I had really admired, and as a sports figure, kind of like idolized for such a long time.
That was awesome.
Yeah, so that was an incredible experience. And then you know what? Overall, I think it's just the repeat business and the referrals, which is such a huge source of business for us. I'm very proud of that because I feel like one of our biggest things is really client relations and doing what's best for the client and making them comfortable. And I think that shows with the amount of referrals and recommendations that we get. So that makes me very happy.
As real estate agents, one of my biggest messages to everybody is you don't have to be, everybody kind of looks, well, who's the best? I've got to be just like them. And I feel like nothing could be further from the truth. You've got to be your best you. And one of the best Dennis things that I love about you is you are authentic. You always make other people feel good. I don't know how cognizant of that you are.
Thank you.
It's true, but you also have this very just sincere way, which I love to talk about on the subject of the listing presentation. I loved, I'm kind of jumping the gun on, I want to talk to you how you handle people in the listing presentation, how you handle price adjustments, how you handle difficult conversations. But tell us, before we get into that, do give us, what is your listing presentation like? Is it a presentation or is it a conversation or how much of the two?
I'll tell you what my typical thing is, and let me kind of segue into that before by saying I couldn't agree with you more. I think that everybody has their own style. You have to feel comfortable with it because ultimately, the more comfortable you are, I think the more confident you are, and the more that resonates with people. And at the end of the day, it shows when you meet with them. People can spot when you're not comfortable and not confident. Nobody wants to be with an agent representing them on one of these huge transactions that's not confident. Having said that, so my typical, and every situation is a little bit different, right? It all depends on the type of client that you're dealing with and the type of property and what we're looking at. But for the most part, I would tell you, when I get a call typically to go meet with somebody for a listing presentation, a lot of times I really don't even take anything with me. I take it more as we're going to sit down, we're going to get to know each other. I'm going to tell you what we have to offer. We're going to walk through the property. I'm going to take a look because sometimes, I don't like to really, obviously, we'll look at the numbers and I'll know the market, especially if it's a market that I really farm and is one of my primary markets. Most of the times I really don't even need to look at things because you know it off the top of your head because you're constantly dealing with it.
Right.
But, I usually will go meet with the people. We'll sit down, we'll talk about the company. I like to go through the house because, it's tough to take comps for something that maybe you're looking at something that's not really comparable. So I like to kind of take that back after the meeting, sit down, gather my thoughts, go through the numbers, and then follow up with a second meeting or a phone call. Having said that, usually when I go and meet with the clients, I usually, depending on the situation, don't really take anything with me. I go and I like to kind of take it as an opportunity to get to know one another. And a lot of people don't realize that. I think that when you sit down with people, a lot of these sellers that maybe don't deal in real estate every day like you and I do, it's a little bit of a stressful situation for them. And I think that's something that a lot of agents take for granted because I don't want to say we're immune to it, but we deal with it every day. So I think one of the biggest keys is, and one of the things that I really try and focus on is making them feel as comfortable as possible. And you really have to kind of get the point across that you're here for them and you're going to do what's best for them. So I like to go, we sit down, we talk, we get to know each other. I like to kind of walk through the property with them and get a feel for the property, and then kind of go back to the office, gather my thoughts, go through comps, and follow up with a second meeting or a phone call to kind of go over everything. But in that meeting, we'll talk about what we'll do for them, talk about the brand, talk about the way that we operate, the way my team structure is as far as, what we do and so on and so forth.
Now, is that on the call? That's on the call after you've done the home tour and sat down and gotten to know them?
Well, no, we'll usually do that when we meet with them.
Okay.
And kind of give them a feel for, how I operate, how we do things, what we've done, and so on and so forth. And then on the follow-up meeting is when we'll give them kind of a breakdown of all the comparables, the marketing, like a marketing plan. Because at that point, after we've met and everybody's comfortable, we'll follow up with a nice presentation, with the marketing plan, a schedule of what we're doing. This is where your house is going to be. The comps, this is what we think the house should be priced at. Some examples of brochures, coffee table books, ads, things that we've done, and so on.
Okay, great. So what I'd love to hear about too is in that, I think we all have that challenge of when we're that second meeting, when they want to know about the price. A few things. Number one, do you typically give them a price, or how do you handle the pricing? When do you price the house? On the second meeting, or do you wait until you list?
No, so I typically, I guess it depends on how the conversation goes, but I typically have always felt that, at least for me, the most effective way to price something effectively is not to let them dictate the price or to just tell them, hey, this is what it is. I kind of like to send them what I'm looking at and sit with them and look at it so we can kind of come to the same realization together. And that has worked well for me because, a lot of times it's like anybody, when you go to sell, you want to get top dollar. But, it's like I tell people, we can do everything in our power, to sell the house. And we're going to do all the marketing we can. And it's kind of like going back to that first interview. One of the things that I tell people is I sit down with them, and chances are in our neighborhood, when you're dealing in the high-end market, you're going to interview 3, 4, 5 people. And you're probably going to take, unless you have like a relative or a friend or somebody that you kind of have to interview, you're going to take probably the 3, 4, or 5 top brokers in that area that sell and interview all of them. And I really come in and tell them the same thing, which nobody tells them, I don't think at least, which is, hey, listen, you're interviewing Realtor A, B, C, D, and E. We all sell in this neighborhood. All of them are great. I can't say one bad thing about them. We're all going to put it in the MLS. We're all going to do great marketing. It's all going to be in the paper. We're all going to do brochures, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you need to go with who you feel the most comfortable with and who you feel is going to fight for you and really, at the end of the day, go to bat for you. And that's really what it boils down to. And more times than not, I feel like that really resonates with people and it really makes them feel comfortable.
I love that. Well, somebody said to me not long ago, I think it was Jason O'Neill, he said people hire for confidence, competence, and caring. That might not be exactly right. And people sell, when people hire a listing agent, they hire confidence, competence, and caring. And when they hire, or they buy that and oh my gosh, now I can't remember the quote. It was so good. But it was about the listing agent having the confidence and caring. And on the buying end, they're just buying a house. It's two completely different perspectives on how they hire the agent and what they need to understand and hear and listen to. So, but I love that, we were having a conversation, I think it was last week, about dealing with emotions and sellers and just really just bringing it, so many people talk about scripts and what do you say and how do you say it? And I think there gets a certain price point where it's not about what you say and how you say it. It's about how you hear the client and listen to them and having the right questions from listening.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I think that, you sit down with them and going back to what we were talking about and exactly what you're saying, it gets to a point where you can't script these things.
Exactly.
And, you're going to sit down with them, and a lot of times they're sophisticated people, but, like I said, you got to remember, for a lot of people, it's a stressful thing, and we take that for granted because we deal with it all the time. So for a lot of people, the thought of locking themselves into a year-long listing agreement with somebody that they really don't know for a stressful thing and such an important thing in people's lives, because for most people, it's the biggest investment that they're ever going to make. It's a big deal. And I think the number one thing is you really have to go in there and you've got to, exude confidence and really make them feel comfortable. And the other thing that people don't realize is, this is when I sit down with a client, this is me interviewing them as much as it's them interviewing me. Because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you guys are a fit and that the relationship's going to go well, because you don't want anybody to be unhappy, and you want everybody to be realistic and manage the expectations properly.
Exactly. And so a question I have for you on that, when you're in that listing presentation, do they know that you're interviewing them? Do you let them know that, or is that just something that you're aware? Are you aware that you're interviewing them, or are they aware with you that you're also interviewing them? Do you communicate that to them?
Sometimes yeah, sometimes no, but I'd say more times not. It depends. I think it's kind of like what you were saying about how you can't script these things. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll mention it just so that people kind of understand where you're coming from. For example, as far as pricing a home high, I had a listing presentation last week for a home that had been on the market with an agent for a year. They had it priced at $3 million. It wasn't a referral. They called me. They had been seeing my ads in the paper and so on. So mm-hmm. They called me. We came in. We met with them twice, and I sat with them, and they were complaining about the other agent. And I said, well, listen, I understand what you're saying, that maybe there was some marketing lacking or whatever, maybe not to what you expected or wanted. But the reality is, if we're going to list it at this price, and by the way, that the home really was probably worth 2.1 or 2.2. Mm-hmm. And I told them, I said, guys, I can't, if I'm not honest with you and tell you the reality of what's going to happen, I'm not doing my job. And, I told them, I said, I can do all the marketing in the world, put it in every single magazine in the world. But the reality is, if we're not going to generate the traffic because it's overpriced, we're not doing our job. We're not doing anything right. Mm-hmm. So I told them, I said, if this is really the number that you guys want and you guys are sticking to this, I may not be the guy for you, because I can't just take your listing and spend this money and then not be able to deliver the results that you expect because we're priced high.
Well, and I think something else you said, because we talked about this before, is you had said to a client, I think it was probably the same situation, you had said they had asked you, why can't we just leave it on the market? And I loved what you said to them. But I'm going to let you tell the story on that part too, because that was great how you said it.
Yeah, so he basically said, I think he was more open to pricing it lower, and the wife was giving a lot more pushback, because their situation, I think, was that they were into the house for that amount of money and they didn't want to lose it. Mm-hmm. And, I basically told them, it's worth what it's worth, and you may have over-improved the property, but the reality is a lot of the things that they did weren't things that other people would pay for. Mm-hmm. And so the husband made a comment to me and said, well, if the market's slow and things just aren't moving, why can't we just put the house on the market at that price and let it sit there? Because what's the difference? It's not going to move anyways. And I told them, I said, my recommendation for you, if that's the thought process, is don't put it on the market yet. Because the reality is, you're going to keep it on the market. It's not going to move. The market's going to turn in a few months or whenever it is. And you may get a buyer a year and a half from now, and they're going to wonder why the house didn't sell. And the house is going to be stale. And people are going to know that it's been on the market for 445 days. And all you're going to get are lowballs. And that's not what you want. It's just counterproductive. You got to be realistic. A lot of times people don't realize, which is such an important part of pricing, is when you price it right in the beginning, sometimes you might get a little more than you expected, or you'll get what it is. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times you get people that think, well, let's price it high and see what happens. And what happens is you forego some good offers, and you end up taking less than what you probably could have gotten, mm-hmm. because the house sits on the market and then people wonder why it hasn't sold.
Exactly. Or you miss good buy, not just good, but good, same thing, but good buyers. Because I think about the different buyers. You've got this is actually a Tom, I have to quote him because he's the one that talks about it, but Thomas Wright. But he says, you've got your ready and willing. And then I don't even remember the other two because I don't want to deal with those. Right? But it's like your ready and willing, your low ballers and your bottom feeders. And the ready and willing are looking at what's coming on the market today. And once they've seen it and it's stale for them and nobody else wants it, they don't either. Because the Barbara Corcoran quote is, everybody wants what everybody wants and nobody wants what nobody wants. And those two things are like, they've got to be taken into consideration and communicated with our clients. But I love hearing you talk about it because you communicate it so well. And I think a lot of agents are we're in a business where it's how many listings you have, how fancy are they, how big are they, or how many are there, any or both of those.
Yeah.
And when you can come to your client from a place of neither of those, but what's the best for you, and they know that and sense that, it's huge for you, it's huge for your client, it's huge for everybody. So I'd love to hear you share that. Yeah, thank you.
It's interesting you say that, because it's true. You know, you got to go in there and you really have to make the people feel comfortable. I'm a big believer in that. And it's funny because that day that I went in, you know, I've got to quote and give credit to George Uribe, our friend.
Yes.
We were talking the other day and he gave me one that I used in that, and he said it to me and I said, man, it's great. And I told the people when I sat with them, I said, I want you guys to think of me as a private banker. I'm not a guy who's going to deal with 60 listings and not give you guys the attention that you deserve.
Mm-hmm.
It's the opposite. I want you to think of me as a private banker. We're going to take your listing and we're going to give it all the attention that it needs and deserves. But if we're not going to price it correctly, all the attention that it needs and deserves is not going to solve the problem.
Oh, beautifully said. Isaac, I hope you wrote every word of that down. Isaac's got it. That was great. Thank you. So you've probably shared a lot. We've shared a lot of ahas just in this conversation, but all of those in your career, what would you say is your biggest aha that you've had?
Aha. As far
like,
as
aha. Well, in your case, most people are like, hey, if I list my house, my grandmother will get me big listings, and it doesn't happen. That happened for you.
Well, she didn't get me big listings, but she got me in the door, thankfully.
Right, she got you in the door. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Most people think that's going to happen, and it doesn't. So you didn't have that aha, but I bet you've had some other ones.
You know, so I'll tell you, you know, I guess I can give you two examples, and I'm not sure if either one pertains to this, but I think, you know, one of the aha moments is, you know, you get into the business, and like anybody who's young and inexperienced, you get into it and you think, this is going to be easy and you're going to make a ton of money. And, you know, like people say, you know, and it's funny, I've got people that tell me all the time, they're like, oh, your job's easy. Anybody could do it. People don't realize it's not easy doing what we do. Not everybody can do it. You know, it takes a lot of work. You know, I think the first 5 to 7 years of my career, I mean, I don't want to say I didn't have a life, but I almost didn't have a life because Saturdays and Sundays I was doing open houses and working. Exactly. And while, you know, a lot of people were working Monday through Friday, a different, you know, a more, I don't want to say normal type of job, but a more normal type of schedule. And they had the weekends to go out on the boat and do whatever it is that we do here. You know, I couldn't do those things. Mm-hmm. So I think that was kind of a reality check where you kind of realize, you know, you kind of get what you put in, and sometimes not even. You've really got to work the business and work it hard and really kind of cultivate those relationships. That's one thing, and I don't know if
that totally pertains. Thank you. That was great. Yes.
No.
So you had one, or was that it, or did you have one more?
No. The other one was kind of more like a Sothebys moment type thing, but I wasn't sure.
Oh, let's do it. I'd love to hear it.
So it's a funny story. I had this was probably 7 years ago already.
Pause for a minute. How long have you been with Sothebys?
I've been with Sothebys since before we were Sothebys. So we became one Sothebys in 2008. Okay. And before that, we were another company, which we were a small boutique company, you know, in a tiny office the size of a just cranking out deals. Wow. And I was with since 2005 or 6.
Okay.
So, and then we became, you know, the Sothebys for this area in December 2008. So when everything was, you know, kind of hitting the fan around here.
Crazy. Okay. So I've been since 2010.
So
tell me the aha about Sotheby's.
Oh, so I had this opportunity where I met these people through a friend of mine's family, and they had on a really beautiful area, this island here connected to Miami by a bridge called Key Biscayne. Mm-hmm. And so they had three houses in three properties in Key Biscayne, and they had them listed with a local broker in the area, and they weren't getting the movement that they wanted or expected or whatnot. And they reached out to me, and they said, we'd like to go to dinner with you and talk about the possibility of you listing these homes. So, I had never, this was probably, like I said, I was probably 27, 28 years old. I had never gone up for 3 listings at the same time before. And so I sit down with the people and we end up having a nice dinner. But, we were there for 2 hours and they invited me to like a social club or whatever they're members of. And the whole 2 hours, we didn't talk anything about real estate. It was just personal talk and small talk and whatnot. And I kind of felt guilty at the end of it because we really hadn't accomplished anything. And I didn't know if it was my fault or their fault or, all of our faults. And so I turned to them after dinner and I said, hey, if you guys want to come into the office this week, I can show you the office and everything that, that we do and what Sothebys has to offer for you and for your listings and whatnot. And, this gentleman, very sophisticated guy, smart guy in the finance world. And he just looks at me point blank and says, no. I don't need any of that. I don't care. I just want Sotheby's. And that was kind of my aha moment, I would say, as far as the brand is concerned, and at least as far as the power of the brand.
That's huge. That's amazing.
Yeah,
well, it opens doors for sure.
I'm sorry?
I said opens doors for sure. You still got to step up to the plate and deliver, but it definitely opens that door. So yeah, clearly, go ahead.
No, and I think, we got 3 listings out of that and we ended up selling them. They were super happy with us and they're clients of ours now and have referred us some huge clients to date, friends of theirs and whatnot. And, as far as the brand's concerned, I think it's one of those things that, like you said, it definitely opens doors, but, you've got to know what you're talking about and you've got to know how to leverage that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's great. Talk about there's a listing presentation, dinner at a social club for 2 hours. And 2 hours later, you've got 3 big listings.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you were talking about, in the beginning, your first 7 years, you worked every day, you worked weekends, and then that kind of balanced out. What is your schedule now? Do you have a team? How do you leverage your time? Kind of give us a picture of your life today in the real estate world.
So the fun thing about this business is no days, every day is different. And
today you're on the Jere Metcalf podcast.
Today I'm on the Jere Metcalf.
Like tomorrow, who knows? You'll be on CNN or Fox or whatever. Anyway,
right. And so, right now what I have is I have an assistant that really deals with all of the office stuff and keeping everything in line as far as the marketing and appointments and all the important things that kind of make the wheels go. Mm-hmm. And that's been going on for about 4 years now, which really, before that I was on my own, and doing that really kind of helped take me up another level because it gave me the flexibility to do a lot of things that I didn't have time to do. Mm-hmm. And it took a lot of the important things away from me that I just wasn't good at and are so important to our business. But right now it's just her, and we actually are just brought on a junior associate, so to speak, who's starting tomorrow. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Oh, wow.
But we're very excited about that.
So now you're going to be official. So by the way, we haven't really talked, which we'll do. I'll have an intro for this, but you're top 25 in all of Sotheby's International, one Sotheby's, which is like almost 700 agents. Yeah. You've been recognized in the top, what is it? The circle of the top producer circle, which is huge. Top producer circle. Yeah. So that's, you've done just on your own, you've made huge leaps and bounds in your success. And we've got in Coral Gables sales for over 220 million in sales for 16 million, 16 and a half, 14.1 and 12 million just in 2016 and 17. So that's awesome by you and your assistant. Good job.
Thank you.
So, where do you, I'm kind of looking, I like to look through my questions sometimes and figure out what I want to ask you that's most relevant to what your lifestyle is and what you've got going on. What is one thing you wish you knew now what is one thing you wish you knew coming into this business that you know now?
One thing that I wish I knew now.
You knew then that you know now.
That's a good question. I'll tell you that two of the things, so I guess I don't know if this kind of goes in line with maybe mistakes that you feel like you may have made or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell you that, some things that I picked up along the way that maybe I wish I would have known back then would be, one of the biggest things in this business is, out of sight, out of mind. So, you got to remember that even though we're all busy, the biggest part of our business is referrals and staying in touch with people. Because the reality is there's so much competition out there and there's so many people out there trying to get your business that the moment people forget about you and somebody else, appealing or attractive comes in the door, chances are you're out. So, one of the things that I think you kind of take for granted when you're starting out and young because you just haven't seen it and been through it is, out of sight, out of mind. You got to stay out there. You got to make sure people see you. You got to stay in touch with people. And the other thing is, I think early on in my career, which is something that I've really tried to focus on now, is you kind of get intimidated or worried about giving people bad news. And you can't do that. If a showing didn't go well, give them the feedback. If the price needs to be reduced, give them the feedback. Sometimes you don't want to deal with something because you don't want to pull the Band-Aid off. And a lot of times it's better just to deal with it right in the moment, rip it off, and just get it going.
Great advice. Yeah. That's great advice. I think anybody that's been in the business can relate to what you said because you almost want to protect your clients from any bad news and just give them the news when it sells, but they need to hear it because they can't make the decisions they need to make to get where they want to be if we don't give it to them. So
well, what's funny is, when the market started to slow down the last time that it had slowed down, we weren't really showing some of our listings because, a lot of our stuff was higher end stuff that obviously your listings are far and few between.
Mm-hmm.
Or few between. So, if you're not giving people feedback, then they're calling you 3 weeks, a month later, and it's kind of like that awkward phone call where, hey, what's going on with the house? And so I really kind of tried to focus on getting in front of that and calling people and saying, hey, listen, I've been talking to other brokers in the area. Everybody seems to be slow. It should pick up. And, kind of giving them the news before they're going to call you and ask for it, because then it's just kind of an awkward conversation that you're not comfortable with.
I always be the one to call for. I mean, I've actually, because of that, exactly what you said, I'm embarrassed. I've been in the business 15 years, but I finally I always would call or whatever, but now I've got my listing coordinator, literally, her job is to stalk me every week so she and I can together regroup on, she's tracking things on her end, I'm on mine. Even if there's not much, whatever there is to report, there's always something to report to our clients every week. What's the market doing? If there's no showings, there's no showings. What are we doing about it, or why, or a little bit of both? And what are your views online? Because in this market, which is a benefit, our showings don't start when they walk in the door. They're also out there online with all of our marketing. And thanks to Sothebys, it's awesome marketing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But you know what? That's the difference. That's the difference between, a great agent, which is what people at that price point and that caliber expect, versus agents that are going to take your listing for a year, 6 months, and just plug it in the MLS and wait for the phone to ring. That doesn't work. That's not what you sign up for.
Exactly. It's not what you're paying for. That's what,
no.
Yeah. Let me see. Where do I want to ask you? I know what I want to ask you next. Books. Okay, wait, no. Before I ask you about the book, I think you're ready for that because I already know about you. But before that, what is your, do you have a CRM? Do you use a CRM?
We don't, and we're actually in the process. So I've actually kind of always had a very old school.
I love this question because you would be surprised how similar your answer is to everybody, but keep going.
Yeah, it's funny because I've for being a young agent, I've always had a very old school approach to the business, which is, networking, people, referrals, and so on. And so I was never very into all the tech stuff, Twitter and all those things. And I'd say in the last 2 years is when we really kind of amped it up and my assistant who handles all that, we got into the Twitter and the Instagram and the Facebook, and all that social media and so on. Right now, we're actually designing a really, really cool website that we're hoping to have up in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Oh, good.
which we're really excited about. We have one now, but this one's just going to be so
What's
much
the
nicer.
URL going to be?
MiamiLuxuryLiving.com.
MiamiLuxuryLiving.com.
Yeah.
Isaac, make sure you link that out for everybody.
And then other than that, we're looking into something that actually another thing that Jorge Uribe told me about, which is contactually.
Yeah, everybody contactually. I keep hearing about contactually. Does he like it?
He just started using it. And he's the one that came in and mentioned it to me. I should actually take him to lunch because that week he told me the private banker thing and that. So those are two valuable things.
I'm gonna come down to Miami and come to lunch. These lunches are great.
Because he'll really make me take him to lunch and he won't make it cheap.
Love it.
But we're gonna look into contactually. We use Resora and all that stuff.
So but you do use. I guess you track everything. If you're using Resora, you've got some kind of a spreadsheet. So you're just tracking everything on a spreadsheet right now.
Yeah, my assistant pretty much plugs everything into a spreadsheet. We were using for a time on some listings, not all, this program. I think it was called Pulse.
Okay.
And we'd log in like all the marketing and all those things, which if a client wanted to kind of loop in and see what's been going on with the house, they could log in with their login. Look, and it'll show everything.
Oh, that's great. I think that's one actually I was thinking of Pulse the other day.
Yeah, it was
great.
Which
one is it where they can see everything that's going on? I'm going to check that out. And then contactually I hear about all the time. Go ahead.
We haven't been using it as much, but we're going to get back into it because it's great. It's so easy. You just plug everything in, and rather than having to send people reports, they can log in once a week or every 2 weeks whenever they want.
I'm going to try that. Yeah, that's awesome. And then what about books? What is you might even get to name us 2 books that you would most recommend people read.
So I'm actually not a big reader, but funny enough, our dear friend Shen Schultz.
Yes.
When we were at the G&E, we were at dinner and we were talking, and I forget how we get into it, but Shen was raving about this book called Never Split the Difference.
I love this book. Yeah. Shen's the reason. I think 2 other people recommended it, but when he finally recommended, that was like the stick that break the cat. I was like, okay, I got it. It's great. Yeah.
It's funny. I'm not a big reader at all, and but Shen's got such a great energy and such a way of expressing things, and he just fired me up about it at dinner, and so I got excited about it. And right there at dinner next to him, I logged on to Amazon on my phone and ordered it, and it came in a couple days later. And I actually just the other day started reading the first couple pages of it, and it looks great. So
it's great. Yeah. I love it. Well, we already had this conversation, but it really changes your whole frame of mind, and it gets you to a more. We try to be authentic, but we're not cognizant or conscious of our own habits by culture or by our nature, where we're still kind of going around the tough stuff. And that book just gets you right in the middle of a difficult conversation and exactly how to handle it. It's great. So, great recommendation. Any others you want to recommend?
No, I mean, that's really it. That's the only one that I actually just started reading, and so far I love it.
So 2 pages in, I'm giving you a hard time.
More like 1.5, but I'll give you the update next time.
Well, now we got you to order it on Audible, so now you'll listen to it. Then you'll. That's how I get through them. I listen.
I'm gonna listen to it now in the car on the way out.
Yes, it's such a good read. And part of me is like, am I just that dumb that I've been that into it because I'm so obsessed with it? Like, or was I just that clueless that I needed this book, or is it really one or the other? It's been great. So, what is the one thing of everything we talked about? What is one thing you want or not talked about that you want to be sure our listeners would take away from this interview?
What is the one thing? It's a good question. I guess, one of the things I would tell you is what we talked about, which is, at the end of the day, which is what we were saying that a lot of agents and people in general take for granted. When you go in for these listing presentations and you're going to deal with people, remember that for the people that you're dealing with and representing, they don't do this every day like we do. And like I said, we take that for granted sometimes. And what for us is second nature and things that we know and are very, very easy and common for us, for a lot of people are very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
And you really, want to make people feel comfortable and make them know that you're confident in your abilities and that you're going to do the best job for them. And really, at the end of the day, that no matter what happens, you're not in it for the money. You're in it because you want to do what's best for them. Because, ultimately you want happy clients just because that's going to make you happy. And they're going to refer you business. And, this business isn't about that one big deal. This business is about years down the road when you've got repeat clients and those clients are sending you clients and so on and so forth. And the other thing I think is, you don't want to be one of those agents that just plugs it into the MLS and goes. You want to go above and beyond, and you really want to do what other people aren't doing. You want to step it up marketing wise. You want to make people feel comfortable. And sometimes the easiest things, it's funny, a friend of mine the other day who was a baseball coach was telling me, he said something to me which I had never thought of, but he said it, and I said, God, that makes so much sense. He said, you've got to control the controllables. And, what I kind of took from that is, all of the easy things that you take for granted, there's no reason why those should slip through the cracks. And those are all things that need to get done, and there shouldn't be any issue with those.
Well said. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's like our job, so the little things mean the most. It's just a matter of doing them. Yeah. They're almost too easy to do them. Awesome. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been awesome having you.
Thank you. I had a great time.